All right, we're talking about the bureaucracy today, and a lot of people say this is the fourth branch of government. So you have the legislative, the executive, and the judicial branch. A lot of people think that bureaucracy is the fourth branch of government, even though that's not listed in the Constitution, and the founding fathers couldn't have conceived of such a thing, and such the size of the government at the time they created the Constitution. So the classic conception of a bureaucracy that was formed by Max Weber. It's hierarchical, so you have at the top of the bureaucracy controls the lower parts of the bureaucracy. Um, Specific tasks, right? So expertise is brought to bear. So for environmental issues, the Environmental Protection Agency will take those issues because the people working in that bureaucracy have specific talent in the environmental area based on merit, and so you can if you move up the chain in terms of command within a bureaucracy, it's based on your own achievements, not your political contributions or which party you belong to or your party's in power and so on and so forth. You're supposed to treat everyone with disinterested passion, so you're not supposed to, if you're a bureaucrat examining your best friend's environmental return, you're not supposed to look at it with the eye of bias, right? It's supposed to be unbiased and well organized. So that's kind of the ideal conception of a bureaucracy that Max Weber put together. Um, so there's been three phases of American bureaucratic history. There was the closed bureaucratic system. So when the country was first formed, you had post office jobs, you had other jobs that needed to be done in the government and the bureaucracy. And from George Washington roughly to John Quincy Adams, those jobs were seen as one of kind of upper class elites, right? So if you were part of the right family and you had the right political connections and a lot of money, then the postmaster job in New York was always in your family, and so then it got passed down to the next heir, almost kind of like a hereditary claim. Um, and that's kind of how it worked. So it was closed. You couldn't get in um, into the system because the elites, the political elites in the country, controlled who was going to get those jobs and get cushy government jobs, um, and basically reinforce their wealth. And it wasn't a very fair or unbiased system, obviously, since a lot of the upper class was regulating themselves and probably not doing the greatest job of that. So, following John Quincy Adams, Andrew Jackson came into power, and Andrew Jackson, the right to vote had been extended to all white males, and so a lot more people came into the political system with the the Jacksonian era, right? So democracy expanded greatly. You had lower class people coming into politics for the first time, and Jackson and his kind of main political guy, Martin Van Buren, who would later become president down the line, came up with the idea known as the spoil system. And the spoil system was basically that if you had helped us out with the campaign and you had voted for us or delivered a lot of votes, so if let's say you convinced a lot of your township in Ohio or in Pennsylvania to vote for Andrew Jackson, then you were going to be the first in line for the postmaster job in your township, right? Or a judgeship or something like that, that the government was some kind of government job. And so that spoil system was a more open system than the closed system had been, because previously the lower class people couldn't get into those jobs, um, in any way, because the elites all held them. Well, once Jackson came in, he had the spoil system, so it didn't matter if you were rich or poor. If you were into politics and you delivered a lot of votes, you too could be the postmaster of Scranton, Pennsylvania, or something. So the spoil system opened up a lot more of those, right? Eventually, then that system continued in all throughout the Civil War. So even when Abraham Lincoln was in office, we still had the spoil system, where if your party came to power in the election, then if say the Republicans in Abraham Lincoln's day defeated the Democrats to elect Lincoln, so all the Democrats that had held jobs in the post office, any kind of other and the ports, looking over tariffs and those kind of things, or the Port Authority. All those Democrats lost their job when the Democrats got voted out of office. So not only did you lose the political race, right? You also lost your job because you were of the wrong parties. Then the Republicans would come in, fill all those same jobs, rewarding the people that had worked for the campaign, um, and would give them jobs based on what they had done in the campaign. And so all of that eventually changed in 1883. One of the first steps was the Pendleton Act, which meant that under the Pendleton Act, we didn't do the spoil system anymore. So the only reason you got a job was if you were qualified, you took the examination, you passed, and you were otherwise capable of doing the job. So no longer was it kind of a political payback. Because again, the spoil system by the 1880s was seen as, well, just because I helped with a campaign doesn't mean I know anything about the Department of Interior or Indian Affairs or anything like that. And so I shouldn't really get that job just because I helped get a bunch of votes, right? And there was all kinds of corruption involved with the system as well. And so in 1883, the Pendleton Act, and was followed by several other acts, started to see those jobs be based more on your merit and your ability to do the job rather than how much you'd helped in a campaign. And slowly but surely, we switched that system, which is more known now as the opportunity system, meaning that if you're qualified and you're capable of doing the job because of your expertise in that area, then you can be appointed to that bureaucratic job. And then this kind of reviews what we just walked through. The closed bureaucratic system, elite men. The problem was Jefferson said few die and none resign. So there just wasn't a dynamic system. People held on to their positions forever, right? And then the spoil system rewarded those good political soldiers, as I said there, but eventually it was seen as corrupt and not very professional. Then the opportunity system. So President James Garfield was assassinated by a job seeker. So you often hear the presidents from kind of the 1800s and the 19th century are upset because they constantly have to deal with job seekers, right? They're always showing up in Washington wanting a job. And the British had moved to the direction of having a more professional bureaucracy, and the Americans did that as well. And there's the Charles Guiteau, who had assassinated President Garfield, right? Give me a job, an office, or your life. And so they threatened the president and had murdered him. And so that really also spurred on changes in the bureaucracy. So the Pendleton Act, right? You had competitive examinations. So this is kind of the change. You started out at the bottom, so you didn't get the top job. You're supposed to be neutral and focus on having a career there rather than every election, the complete shakeup of the whole department. It was more of a focus on being a career person. And the Civil Service Commission was the mechanism that enforced the compliance with the Pendleton Act. And there's just a sample of the type of examination that you would have to take. You'd have to explain the machine described in the two drawings to the right, and describe it and what it is, right? Then there's the different subjects that you would have to be conversant in to be able to get a job in the bureaucracy. So who are the bureaucrats? A lot of people don't like bureaucrats. That's just kind of a faceless name, right? They feel like these people are the ones that slow us down and make life difficult. But bureaucracies are getting bigger and bigger, right? As the country does more and more with Obamacare and all these other things, we need people to do those jobs. And so employment with the government becomes a huge source of employment in the country. And most of the bureaucrats work in D.C., and the argument is that they're ineffective, inefficient. The government can never do anything as efficient as the private sector, is one common claim. And there's always red tape involved, right? And so here just shows the growth in government employees over the years. And as you can see there, there's been a steady growth in the number of government employees, and it's not going to go down anytime soon. So again, here's just the numbers, snapshot taken in time for the number of employees. As you can see there, There's a vast number of employees in the Defense Department, the Postal Service, and all those kind of areas. Just an overview of how many people work there. Who are the bureaucrats? Well, they're the most demographically representative part of the government. So the diversity mirrors the private sector. So you see 41% are college graduates, 59% are not college graduates, average age 47, fairly well split male female, and then a good disparity, 31% minorities, 69% white. And so it is a much more diverse part of the government than we see, like for instance, in Congress and other places. And so these are just another chart of federal non-postal civilian employees. So defense is a huge department. Post services is a huge department. Veterans Affairs. It's going to get bigger now that we have more issues in that area with healthcare and whatnot. Homeland Security is going to grow, and then all others is 28%. Just another listing of different categories that the bureaucrats are in. So how they got there, it used to be for patronage, so that was the spoil system. You got your job because of the help you'd given to the campaign. We moved on from that to be based on merit and not your political background. And the federal office now in charge is the Office of Personnel Management, right? And they're looking for more diversity, all those kind of things that weren't the case in the past. You still have to pass examinations and qualification tests. Here's the different salaries that you can make and where the number of employees falls in that range. So GS, you'll see your GS1, GS10, that just says what salary you're making from the government, right? And so you can look over there and see the number of employees at the different schedules for the salary. Now, there's still a fair bit amount of reward that comes after an election. So even though we don't really do the spoil system anymore, if you've helped out a lot with the campaign, the Plum Book is still in existence. And so Congress publishes the Plum Book, which is all the jobs that the government has available that they need to fill. And a lot of times when there's a new party in the presidential office, remember the president gets to appoint all these people. If you've helped the president get elected, then you're hoping that the president will appoint you to be the ambassador of Bermuda or someplace really nice, right? Jamaica maybe. And so the Plum Book just lists the top jobs available that the president can appoint someone to, and a lot of the jobs will still be going for the work that had been done in the campaign for supporting the president. So there's still a bit of that there, but you do have to be qualified to be appointed to that job at the same time. You can't just be a political handout. So bureaucracies, we have the cabinet departments, right? So the cabinet is part of the bureaucracy. Each cabinet is headed by a secretary, so the agricultural department headed by the secretary of agriculture, State Department, Secretary of State, Defense Department, right, by the Secretary of Defense, and Department of Justice by Attorney General. Each one of them has its own kind of budget and policy things, and Republicans have been trying to shrink the size of government and have wanted to eliminate some of these different offices. So here's some of the different departments and how the executive branch is organized, right? So here's the different departments and the cabinet positions, the big ones, right? State, Treasury, Defense, Justice. The ones that aren't quite as prominent, right? Interior, Agriculture, Commerce, Labor, Transportation. Homeland Security will probably move up to the middle level fairly soon. Then you have Veterans Affairs, Education, Energy, Health and Human Services, and HUD. And then down here you have a whole bunch of independent government corporations that you see. So Farm Credit Administration, right? They give loans to farmers. Peace Corps, Postal Services down there, Park Service, all those kind of um, things that you see the government do. A lot of them are down below there. And here's just an overview of the Department of Interior as an example, right? So at the top you have the Secretary, and then you have the Executive Secretary and Congressional Legislative Affairs, Communications. The Solicitor is kind of that person's lawyer. The Assistant Secretary, Inspector General, and here's all the different areas that fall under the Department of Interior, right? There's the National Park Service, Bureau of Indian Affairs, Land Management, Geological, all these kind of different things. A lot of presidents think they can reform the bureaucracy and change things around. So they think if we can just reorganize it and reshuffle it, it'll make it work better. And rarely does that the case, right? But that's just an example of how a bureaucracy is organized. Regulatory agencies. These are independent agencies that regulate. So the Nuclear Regulatory Agency is a good example where their whole job is just to make sure that nuclear power is regulated properly in the country. So they're looking at nuclear power plants, how those are doing, the people applying for jobs with nuclear power plants, all those kind of things. It's a commission of 5 to 10 people, and they make rules about nuclear power. That's just an example, but you have other similar regulatory agencies, right? There's always a concern that the people working in these agencies used to work in the private sector in the same area, right? So the SEC regulates Securities and Exchange Commission, regulates stocks and trades and those kind of things. Well, a lot of people that work for the SEC used to work on Wall Street, right, as stock traders and work for those kind of people. Well, they leave the private sector, they leave Wall Street, and they come to Washington to regulate Wall Street. But they still have friends, and they still work with colleagues that they used to work with in the old days. And it's kind of like, oh, Bill, what's the big deal? We used to do this all the time back when you worked for our firm, that kind of thing. So there's always a concern that the agencies that are supposed to regulate these things are really controlled by people sympathetic to the industry, therefore, quote unquote, captured by the industry and not really a true independent watchdog. Alright, so this next thing is kind of a choose your own adventure, and I'll show you, and I want you to work through it on your own PowerPoint because it's kind of a fun thing. I put it together. And so you're going to pick different choices, and this is a real case with real people. So your name is Chantrell or Michael Sackett. On April 7th, you begin adding dirt, and this is going to try to take you through both the court system and the bureaucracy. Begin adding dirt and rock to your lot in preparation for building a house, which is several lots away from a lake in Idaho. November 26th, without prior warning or process, the EPA issues you a compliance order, which orders you to return property to its prior state or face a penalty of $75,000 a day. So though there were other buildings between their lot and the EPA has determined that the Sacketts were contaminating a wetland. Do you click on to contest the determination by the EPA that your dream house lot is a wetland, or 2, do you pay the $250,000 fine, pay contractors another $50,000 to restore the lot, and look elsewhere for your dream house? So you're gonna, depending on what you pick, it's gonna lead a difference. You're gonna click down here on one or the other, right? And it will send you down one path or the other based on what you pick. So let's say we're gonna contest the thing. So you're going to contest. You choose option 1 of sue or lay down. You're going to contest the EPA's determination of your lot as a wetland. Do you 1, get an attorney like your professor, or 2, get an attorney that is an expert in environmental law? And as I said, be careful, right? Don't trash me too much. But I'm going to go ahead and pick an environmental law attorney. All right, option 2, more attorneys or less attorneys. You choose option number 2 and get an expert lawyer in environmental law. The lawyer tells you that the definition of a wetland is, and so on and so forth. So that's how you will work through the PowerPoint, and I want to know kind of where you end up with it and how well you did, and the stakes are going to keep getting higher. I want you to post where you stopped or what your result is once you make it through the entire operation, okay? Okay, so I hope you worked all the way through that choose your own adventure. You're going to have to open up the PowerPoint as a separate PowerPoint and then click on the number that you want to pick in the choose your own adventure. So you'll have to open up it as a separate PowerPoint. You can't just open it in the video, but work through there, post where you ended up, what you chose and why you chose it, those kind of things, and post that in the discussion groups. And that should be interesting to see where you ended up. All right, so government corporations, we talked about these. Amtrak, Postal Service, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, which do mortgage lending, are examples of these. Independent executive agencies, so the GSA, NASA, right, is an example of that. And so these are other bureaucracies within the government that don't kind of fit anywhere else. So they're independent. NASA, right, with space and those kind of things. So a government corporation, they provide services like a private company, and they charge for services, but then they also have the backing of the U.S. government, so they kind of will never fail, right? Fannie and Freddie Mac, when the mortgage crisis hit, they were backed up by the government. So here's going to be a little quick explanation of the financial meltdown and why, at least in my opinion, I think the Great Recession happened, and it deals a lot with bureaucracies, right? So in the 90s, we wanted people to own their own homes, right? We thought home ownership was a really important thing. So we wanted more and more people to qualify for loans so that they could own their home. Because statistics showed us that most people will try to pay off their home. And home ownership is an important thing to raise yourself out of poverty, makes you want to go get a job, better yourself, all those kind of things, right? But at the same time, in order to accomplish that, one of the trade-offs was lending banks could also now become investment banks, right? So previously there was a separation that said, well, if you do this type of banking where you're a lender, you can't also be an investment bank in the same kind of investments, right? So they wanted those separated because they felt like there was some conflicts of interest there. Well, that wall was taken down, right? So what started happening is banks would say, well, I'm not really giving a mortgage because I think it's a good loan to make. I'm giving it because I can make fees off of closing on the transaction. And if down the line this person can't really pay their mortgage and has trouble paying it back, they'll just go to a different bank, refinance, and they'll just keep refinancing with a different bank, meaning getting a new mortgage, trying to lower their payments. It'll be somebody else's problem, not our bank, right? We'll make this loan even though it's sketchy. We don't know if this person can pay it back or not. It doesn't look like they may be able to. But if they have trouble, they'll just go to a different bank because they're going to try and hang on to their loan, right? So the incentive really wasn't making a good loan for the bank. The incentive was doing the transaction so you could get fees on it, right? That was a fee-making machine for many banks. Now, when the mortgage happens, it's seen as a very stable investment, right? So if I buy your mortgage, because I think you're going to pay off your house, I'm going to make some good interest off that money, and it's kind of guaranteed because I think you're going to want to hold on to your house as much as you can. And so what happened was Wall Street would bundle all these mortgages into stocks and sell them, saying, well, yeah, you can have this batch of mortgages, which is going to pay some pretty good dividends and get some good return on your money. And here's the price for buying all these mortgages. And so they did that as an investment, right? And so the economic basis of what they said was, well, not only are people incentivized to pay off their house, but then, oh, by the way, we're also going to have insurance there that even if these all fail, the insurance company will pay you insurance because the mortgage isn't being paid back, right? So AIG, which is a big insurance company, provided insurance for a lot of these mortgage-backed securities, like mortgage-backed stock, right? So if the mortgage didn't pay, you would get the insurance money, so it kind of seemed like a no-lose situation, right? Now, when AIG was preparing the insurance claim, just like any insurance claim, when they're writing insurance on your house insurance or car insurance, they're not thinking that there's going to be a flood in Sioux Falls and everybody's house in Sioux Falls is going to be making a claim at the very same time. We might not have money to prepare that. And so with AIG, Unfortunately, that's what happened. All these mortgage-backed securities, when the recession hit, no one could pay back their mortgage, right? And the banks weren't going to refinance anymore. And that was the big problem. Banks weren't going to change the mortgages, and so now all these mortgages were going into foreclosure, meaning that the bank that had it last is going to be stuck with it. So all these mortgages are starting to go into foreclosure, and the system is kind of rupturing, right? Well, when they come into foreclosure, AIG is then supposed to provide insurance to back them out. And AIG comes and says, we didn't know all of these were going to go into foreclosure all at once. We don't have the money to be able to pay these insurance claims, right? So the government, U.S. government, had to then step in and bail out AIG to make sure there was enough money to provide money into the system. Otherwise, we would have had a real financial collapse. And hence, when all the foreclosures happened, it drove down the price of real estate. Nobody could refinance or get a new mortgage, and everything, the risk of everything became higher, right? People didn't want to make loans because they were so risky, because everything was failing kind of all around. So back to implementation. We talked about this in the congressional area. We're going to talk about it in the bureaucracy as well. Again, translating the goals of a policy into goals and objectives of a policy into what is actually an operating program. So again, you can write the best law in the world, but if it's not implemented properly, it's not going to work. And so bureaucracies are the ones that have to do a lot of the implementation of the law. So if you're going to run Obamacare, it's going to be run out of Health and Human Services, which is an agency under the executive branch, right? So you have to have all these members of the executive branch. The IRS didn't hire anybody extra to deal with Obamacare. The IRS is supposed to police and enforce people buying health care. And so you have to implement the policy and have the agency take over that policy and turn it into regulations, forms, rules, all those kind of things. You have to have the resources to accomplish that. And so if bureaucracies don't do a good job at that, then the policy can fail. So how do things fail, right? Well, sometimes program design, sometimes the program is just not designed properly, right? If you're just going to give a handout to people instead of kind of job-based welfare kind of stuff, it can fail as a result of not giving people the skills they really need to succeed, right? That was part of the welfare reform that we saw during the Clinton administration. Lack of clarity. Sometimes the law is unclear, it's ambiguous, and we don't know what we're supposed to really do, and sometimes they conflict with other parts of the law. Or sometimes you're not given the resources as an agency to really enact it, right? They just spoke about the IRS trying to implement Obamacare, while at the same time trying to audit all kinds of tax returns around the country. Again, lack of resources. You need personnel, training, you need money to go out and audit things if you're the IRS. You can also lack the resources to back up your actions, right, in the court system, or just having people enforce the law on the ground. Administrative routine, right, that can also harm implementation. You get into a funk where you're not really implementing the law properly. Standard operating procedures can bring uniformity to complex organizations. So you can have a whole book of operating procedures that you want the lowest guy from New Mexico to follow in that Social Security office down in Santa Fe, Mexico, along with the one in Washington, D.C. and the one in Chicago. Anywhere the Social Security office, there's a standard operating manual for them to refer to, so you get the same kind of treatment in all around the country, no matter what Social Security office you go to. And it's sometimes difficult to change those routines, though. If you ask, or now we're going to implement this new thing, if that's outside the norm of the operating manual and what people have done for a long time, it can be difficult to implement that. Sometimes the administrator's disposition can cause a failure in implementation. Sometimes the street level bureaucrats are the ones that you would run into at the local office, right? Even a police officer can be a street level bureaucrat. Um, but administrative discretion to select amongst various responses to constituents coming in the door and saying, well, how does the program work with my situation, right? Well, that administrator on the ground in Santa Fe has to have an answer and can't always call Washington, D.C. to give him the answer to give to this person, right? There's going to have to be some discretion down on the ground. And the other thing that can cause problems in implementation is fragmentation. So if you have various policies strung out overall, Homeland Security, Department of Justice, Department of Interior, the Agriculture Department, if all of them have oversight over something like food security, that can be very difficult to work across all those agencies because there's turf wars. It's hard to get people across bureaucracies to share information and make systems work with each other, right? And sometimes agencies have different rules for the same policy. So here's just as an example, border security in 2002. Here's all the different departments and bureaucracies that have some kind of authority or jurisdiction over border security. And you see the Department of State over there, the Post Office, Department of Defense, Commerce, CIA, Agriculture. So as you can see, it's very difficult to get all of these people and all of these different departments on the same page to implement a change in border security policy. So the Voting Rights Act is generally considered a success, and why? It had a clear, concise goal. Implementing the voting was clear. We're going to have you're going to run your voting data through the Department of Justice, and if they disagree with it, you're going to get sanctioned. And the people enforcing the law had a lot of passion about doing it because it was ensuring the rights to vote in the South, where it previously had not been experienced, right? Regulation of the economy. Regarding the kind of the use of the government to regulate the private sector, it's always a little bit controversial, and you'll see some people argue the government should stay out of private business and let kind of the market run itself. But at the same time, what we saw with the Great Recession was an assumption that the banks that were going to do the lending would not get out of control and did not need to be regulated because the market would tell them not to make such risky loans. But in fact, they ended up doing it because of other incentives that the government didn't take account of. And so now we see more regulation in that area than we had before. A command and control policy. So the government tells businesses how to reach certain goals, and it checks the progress and punishes the offender. So if you have to do accountings because you're an oil and gas company and you have to let the government know how you're working in that area or in the nuclear regulatory area, the government will tell them how to comply with the law, right? Sometimes they're used, so the command and control system is the government tells you how to reach goals, and if you don't reach those, like your carbon emissions or something like that, then you're going to be punished. Another type of system, and we'll stick with carbon, right, is to create a market-like strategy where, all right, well, I'm a power plant and I emit more carbon than I'm allowed, but if I do that, I can buy carbon credits from some other power company and do that, and so it's more of a market strategy. So I can buy kind of the right to pollute from someone else that's not polluting as much. So that's a controversial topic, obviously, as well, but that kind of brings home what the incentive system would be. Some agencies are proactive in their areas, and some are more reactive. All regulations contains these elements. A grant of power, so the bureaucracy, if you're the EPA, you've been given a grant of power from Congress and a set of directions from Congress on what you need to do and how you need to do it, right? A set of rules then goes from the agency itself and then you have to have a means of enforcing compliance with those goals and the regulations. So each bureaucracy has those kind of um, sets of instruction within it. Now, there's been a move towards deregulation, right? The lifting of restrictions on business industry and all those kind of things. And the reason would be that a lot of people say regulation raises the cost of doing business, right? So if I'm a bank and I've now got all this regulation of my lending practices, I now have to hire people just to make sure, just to help me comply with all those regulations if I want to keep lending, right? So it's raised the prices, um, competitiveness over abroad. So let's say Ireland doesn't have these kind of restrictions on um, regulation of banking, and so we have see a lot more Irish banks doing work in investment property in New York or something like that. It's just a completely made up example, but that would give you it's the kind of thing that they're talking about. And the regulations just don't always work well, right? They don't always. There's always kind of unintended consequences of regulating something. But some, with the Great Recession, argue that regulation is needed because if you leave people to their own devices, kind of back to the old founding fathers thing, if you believe that humanity has its own self-interest at base, right, then people will not act with the common good in mind. They won't act charitably. They will act with their own self-interest and short-sighted. So even if the economy goes down, they don't care as long as they benefited from that one transaction. And if people are short-sighted and looking at that, the government can step in with regulation to say, no, when you do these transactions, you can't make them so self-interested that it's going to cause problems for the economy and cause all the mortgage companies to shut down and those kind of things. Now, presidents try to control the bureaucracy. They try to appoint the right cabinet secretaries, executive orders, which is a specific power the president has to control different parts of the bureaucracy, is a power the president has. They can do things with the budget, right? Grow it or shrink it based on their priorities as president. They can try to reorganize it, and as I said, many presidents have tried to do that, reorganize the agencies to make them better work. It's not been very successful a lot of times. Right? Congress tries to control the bureaucracy, so they have a say. The Senate gets to confirm cabinet position appointments. They have control over the budget. They can hold hearings and review the actions of a bureaucracy to determine if they're valid or not. So Congress can control the bureaucracy as well. They can also rewrite the legislative rules. Remember, the bureaucracy can't act unless it gets a law from Congress telling it is enforced and empowered to act. So Congress can go back in and change those rules if they want to. Right? So what are iron triangles? Well, the idea of an iron triangle is that you have over here, let's say, the SEC. We'll go back to my Wall Street example. So you have the SEC on one hand, and they're supposed to regulate Wall Street, right? Over here you have kind of the investment banker interest group, and then over here you have the Commission on Banking or the Committee on Banking in Congress. And the argument is, yeah, they exist independently, but they have mutual beneficial things, right? So the interest group gives money to the congressional candidates in charge of the banking committee, and they kind of tell the SEC how to run things. The people on the SEC were formerly people on Wall Street, so they don't want to anger the friends on Wall Street, but so the people working in congressional on the banking committee also used to work on Wall Street or used to work for the SEC. So it's all kind of a closed system where the people are regulating themselves, and that's the idea of an iron triangle. More modern senses are, it's not really an iron triangle, it's more of a network system, which is more fluid and not as difficult to get into. Right? So issue networks is the new catchphrase that, well, yeah, we've got these networks of people, right? When we network, when we're out trying to get job interviews and stuff, same thing happens between the SEC, Wall Street, congressional committees. It's all just one big network of people. So it's not really this hard triangle to break into. It's just a network that you can plug into it in different places. Here's the traditional idea of an iron triangle, right? So this uses tobacco division of the Department of Ag, right? Over here is the interest group for the tobacco lobby. Here's the congressional subcommittee on the agricultural committee. So the bureaucracy provides them with information and those kind of things and rulings, information on the industry, and support for the budget requests come from the interest group. So then the interest group works with Congress, tries to convince Congress to give more money to the bureaucracy. Um, and so that's what the interest group is, right? It's kind of working both sides. It's providing information, supporting their budget, and then hitting up Congress saying, well, we'll vote for you in the next election. You give more money to the operations of the tobacco division of the bureaucracy, right? Um, and so this is the traditional conception of an iron triangle. So the idea of a iron triangle to many seems like a state, a government out of control, right? But the size of the bureaucracy has shrunk, um, and so agencies like the IRS don't have enough resources to enforce Obamacare, and neither does Health and Human Services. Um, but they're only there to carry out the policies Congress and the president tells us what's to do. So again, people think of bureaucrats as unelected, and they are, right? So the cabinet positions are appointed through Congress, the top positions, but the vast majority of jobs underneath them, um, are unelected positions that you just hired by that agency, right? Courts can try to hold bureaucracies accountable, and it's impossible anyway to elect millions of bureaucrats to populate the government. As long as they're representative of the body as a whole, the hope is that with the diversity and with kind of the common people there, they will help the government feel more accessible to everyone, right? But that's the question: is it really that way, um, or do we have a excuse me, a different feel for bureaucracy?